Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today for this webinar. We're going to talk about competitive intelligence and how to make sure you know what's going on in your industry. Let's just give everybody a minute to get into the room. So we have participants are growing here. I suppose we could get started. More people will no doubt join us during the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes, as is always the case. We're going to have a conversation today about making sure you're not blindsided by the patents or the technology or the research and all that sort of things that goes on at your competitors, and making sure you understand what the market is and how you can take this information and try and gain some kind of competitive advantage from it. That's the conversation today. We have a panel. We have a PowerPoint, which you will have access to. Renee and her team will give you a link in the chat so everybody can download it. But Renee, why don't we go ahead and introduce the panelists?
Sounds good. All right, so today we're going to start with our moderator. We have Gene Quinn. He's a patent attorney and a leading commenter on patent law and innovation policy. He founded IP Watchdog in 1999 and since has twice been named one of the top 50 most influential people in IP. He is regarded as an expert on software patentability and U.S. patent procedure and has repeatedly been recognized as one of the top IP strategists in the world. Next, we have Tom Rundell. He is Head of Solutions Operations for Cypher at LexisNexis Intellectual Property. With a bachelor's in marine biology from Swansea University, he has spent the last 3 years blending his technical knowledge with IP and business to assist companies in evaluating their patent strategies. He enjoys working with clients to find creative solutions to uncover new areas of technology development, and is particularly interested in using patents as an innovation metric. Sorry about that. Next, we have Rosanna Lindquist. She is a senior information research scientist at the Hershey Company, where she manages the Technical Intellectual Property Committee. As part of the technical intelligence group within Hershey Research and Development, her focus areas include IP strategy, research and landscape analysis, competitive technical intelligence, and scientific information research. Rosanna has an MLS with more than 10 years of experience in the food industry IP. And last but not least, we have Willem Roberts. He's a partner at Kilburn and Strode, where he advises clients on all aspects of patent process, including IP audit and capture, IP filing strategies, and patent portfolio management techniques. In his practice, he handles a broad and diverse range of cases before the UK Patent Office, EPO, and WIPO. Gwilym is a visiting professor at Queen Mary University of London and co-hosts the podcast Two IPs in a Pod alongside CIPA's Lee Davies. So you're in great hands with this panel. Back to you, Gene.
Great. Thanks a lot, Renee, and thank you all for being here and spending a portion of your day to hear us talk about this important topic. What I'd like to do is go around the horn here and get everyone to give me their initial preliminary thoughts. Maybe we can start with you, Tom, since this was an idea that LexisNexis came to me about wanting to discuss, which obviously is very important, and I think it's a underappreciated. I think all of the strategy that can be done in our industry is not done to the extent certainly it could be, and it's not as appreciated as it can be. So anytime we can shine some light on that, I think it's a good thing. But what are your preliminary thoughts? What do you want people to know? Maybe why was it this topic of particular interest to you?
Yeah, no, thank you, Gene. And I think my sort of preliminary thoughts on this are it's all around how we can approach this topic with a data-led approach. So I think for me, it's always around understanding the importance of data to provide solutions to various challenges in facing the IP industry. I think today we'll be talking about benchmarking and competitive intelligence. And my interest, my focus has always been to help people understand how to get to insights, get to data quickly, how to structure your communication to ensure that we're unlocking the key messages in a clear and concise manner, And just, yeah, really delivering the key messages to businesses that a data-driven approach can unlock. So for me, that's the kind of the my initial thoughts on this topic.
Great, thanks a lot, Tom. Rosanna, not to unnecessarily pigeonhole you, but you really are the data user, the data consumer, the information finder, I suppose, on behalf of the company. When you look at this topic, what do you want to share with people on a preliminary basis?
I think just a few things. First, primarily, don't be the last to know. I think everyone has probably been in a situation where someone higher up than them happens to see something in the news about someone filing patent A or filing patent B. And if you're not being proactive about this, you're not keeping tabs on what's happening in your industry, then you're going to be faced with a reactive situation where you're not going to have the benefit of good, thoughtful decision-making and response. And there are plenty of ways that you can be proactive about this and ensure that you know about things as soon as possible and before you're scooped by other sources. And then lastly, just make sure that you're using multiple sources to keep tabs on your competitors. There's lots of resources out there that you can leverage to provide a more holistic view of what's happening in your industry and in your technology spaces.
Great, thanks a lot, Rosanna. And last but not least, Gwilym, from the attorney's perspective, what big picture, where do you want to begin the conversation?
I think the amount of data that's now out there is just overwhelming for pretty much every client I talk to. And you name the type, whether it's a tech-heavy startup or an established player, or the rare thing of a genuine new platform technology, trying to keep up to speed, trying to manage all that information. And there's a few reasons for it, but principally understanding how to manage the risk element is, I think, daunting and confusing. And so it's very easy to get blindsided, but by the same token, if you get things right, you can actually use that data to your advantage.
Yeah. If you know what you're looking for and you can sort through the various haystacks to find it, and you have a process in place, and we're going to talk about that, then getting actionable intelligence is useful and possible. Without processes in place, the amount of data it's staggering how much data is out there. All right, so great introduction, everyone. Now Tom has got a handful of slides for us to set the stage here. So Tom, can you tell us what we're looking at here? I think you're muted.
Always the fast one, right? So yeah, no, thank you, Gene. So I think what we're looking at on this slide here is just a few of the challenges that we see, or that I see at LexisNexis, our customers and the organizations that we work with coming to us for support with. It's really varied, right? So we have people that are really looking to us for support with licensing and SEPs awareness. And we've recently acquired IPlytics as a business to help us provide that information to the customer. We are working with a lot of companies now to explore the sustainability of their innovations, and it's a real kind of push at the minute to get that alignment to the UN SDGs and other sustainability metrics to ensure that we're innovating in the right ways. But for me, one of the biggest and the most frequent questions that we get is, all around competitive intelligence and benchmarking. And I think if we pop across to the next slide, I think when I'm speaking to customers, I'm hearing a lot of the same questions coming up time and time again, and it's always around, tracking the competitive landscape. Who am I supposed to be tracking? What are they doing? What does my business need to know? And I think importantly, sometimes where to start is the tricky one. And again, on the next slide here, we set out a really basic and possibly oversimplified process here for how do you actually go ahead and run through that benchmarking process. Starting with identifying your competitors, you're moving on to defining what metrics are important to you and to your business, exploring the data. And I think, as Gwilym said earlier, the vast amount of data that comes out of that, exploring that and understanding what is relevant, what is not relevant. And then, of course, the human element here, combining it all together and communicating those findings to the wider business. And just maybe touching on that first one again, in the past, it was always very easy, or much more easy, to understand who your competitors were. Take the automotive space, you would have your suppliers, your OEMs, and that was that. But I think the world is now increasingly interconnected. You've got, the automotive sector is now influenced heavily by tech, by network, by connectivity, and having an approach, a data-led approach to actually identifying who is operating in your technology area. That for me is a really important a really important part of the benchmarking process, and the part that I've been helping my my users, my customers to understand over the past 3.5 years.
Great, good. I want to go back one slide, and I want to bring Rosanna in here, because it strikes me, Rosanna, that this slide is a necessary key building block, a starting for people like you who are trying to go through and keep tabs on what's going on. And you have to have a very well-developed sense of who you're looking for and what you're looking for before you can ever have an idea of what am I missing, I suppose. So can you walk us through this, like, how do you architect, how do you sketch out what it is in the first instance that you want to ask, or that you think you should be asking?
So I think the first thing is to understand where the core areas of interest are for your business. Where do you want to compete? And what are the technology enablers in those particular spaces? And, when you're trying to understand that space, it's helpful to do a variety of tech landscaping, just to first understand who the key players are. I think most people probably know, the obvious competitors in their space, but you don't want to miss any emerging players or new entrants to that space. So that's why I always recommend starting with the landscape to see who all is out there. Once I identify who we need to look into further, then I try to dig a little bit deeper. So my team takes a broader look at the competitive atmosphere as a whole. So we don't like to just present patent data in a vacuum. Like, we want to accompany that with other useful business data to provide a broader picture of why. So why is this patent information valuable? What does this tell us about this business? What does this tell us about where they might investing, or what direction they might be going in? Or what do we see that's ostensibly absent from their portfolio that they are working on, and why do we think that is the case? So definitely looking at a variety of sources to make sure that you can tell a story with your information. And then, once you've identified those key competitors, then creating alerts both on that specific competitor themselves, as well as those topical areas, just to make sure that you're not missing anything.
So good. That's a great background. Gilliam, how do, well, okay, so you're the attorney, you get this information, now you're going through it. How do you decide whether, it's, I guess I'm trying to get at the question of, am I missing anything? Do I have everything that I need? Do I have everything that I want? Do I need a deeper dive? And how do you come to that kind of determination? And then the second part of the question is going to be, and then if, let's say you do decide that I need a little bit more, we'll talk about the working together with you and the data sciences to get, a robust picture. Because I think at some point in time, it really becomes a collaborative effort here. But so how do you look at this information in the first instance?
Oh, a great question. Thank you. And Rosanna, you've asked, I think you said why at least twice in your little segment there, and that's the question. I've done quite a lot of kind of strategy work, and I don't like all the strategy things. There are too many out there, but I do like the 5 whys question. WHYS, not WIC. Five. So you keep asking, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And you get deeper and deeper in. And I think actually one of the most important things is at the very beginning, and Tom, your slides are great for this. When you're scoping the data that you want to get out, you want to be asking, why am I trying to get that data? And you don't ask it once, you ask it more than once. Why am I going to get that data? To bench against my competitors. Why do you want to bench against your competitors? Because we're worried about the IPs. What is it you're worried about? And so on. And I think the key point here to make sure that you get the data that you can then analyze is to start with that. For example, I'm really worried because I think I've got 2 major competitors muscling into my market. I need to know where they are, what they're doing, what their IP is, how that's going to fit against, etc., etc. With that information and with that strategy at the outset, then the data I'm going to get back, I've already tuned once. So I'm not going to sit there and try and sift through it and find the stuff I need. And so these questions here that you've presented, Tom, and Rosanna is asking that why, I think is the very first thing that you have to do. And in the end, you keep asking, and you're going to get back to your business's key strategy and mapping on what you're doing with the data and what data you need to further the IP part of it. With that in your head, then suddenly the data starts to get manageable and maybe get a little bit less, which is, I know I'm talking to a lot of data scientists here, but less is not always bad.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the tuning. That's a great way to explain it. It almost feels to me like, there's a bit of a kaleidoscope feature, right? You have all this kind of data, or maybe the better analogy is, a camera that's when you pick it up and you point, it's out of focus, and now you got to get it in focus. But then you might want to take a picture of the same scene and you want a bigger perspective or a different perspective, and then you got to refocus on. So there's this big, huge corpus of data that you can get your arms around. And depending upon how you're tuning it or focusing it, it can tell you different stories and give you different information, right? So how do you guys like work together? And I know you guys don't necessarily work together, but like the data scientists work with the lawyers who are gonna then opine and strategize. How does that go back and forth so that you have the iterations that you need and the confidence in the data that you're looking at? And it's not to say the data is not confident. That's not the right way to say it. How do you have confidence that the data set that now you're looking at is going to be able to be focused to answer your question? I think that's what I'm really trying to get at. Thoughts, Rosanna or Gilliam? Gilliam, you want to go first?
I'm happy to kick off with that because it's absolutely the right question, and it's a question of the team, and it's a question of starting again with kind of the objective for the client. So to be honest with you, I wouldn't mind having the end customer in either in that meeting or having had a very good briefing meeting before that to have them along as well, because in the end we are providing this to a number of possible audiences, and that's really important. And an early point there actually is to bear in mind who is that audience, because it's a very different story if you're taking it to the head of IP than if you're taking it to the CEO. They're going to want very different pictures. So that kind of data, that kind of background information is key. And if I can actually, I mean, Rosanna, out of interest, which stakeholders would you be talking to?
So it varies. Certainly VP of R&D, key R&D managers, but also sometimes even marketing. Oftentimes you have a mixed room, so you need to make your deliverables accessible to a broader audience. And Guillaume, you made some great comments about the question process in advance, like understanding the needs of your stakeholders and doing a thorough technical interview at the beginning to understand what are you going to use this information for? What is the purpose of this analysis so that I can focus on the right information? And then when I present those findings, I always ask the audience, like, hey, is this surprising to you? Or is there information that you think I'm missing? So definitely lean on the people that are the experts in the areas where you're operating. People naturally love to talk about what they do, especially scientists. So for me, that's not a hard sell. I just go up to them and say, hey, I've got this request and you want to know more about this. Can you tell me more about what you're working on and what problems you're trying to solve, and people will open up to you. So don't be afraid to ask those questions. It's way better than investing the time and energy into the work only to find out that you didn't really deliver what they were looking for and then having to rework it.
That's the problem, right? You know, like you give the information, oh, that's not what I wanted. Well, that was what you asked for. Okay, so a lot of times I think there's ships passing in the night here. And so we've kind of danced around this last all the way over to the right bubble here on our box on Tom's slide number 5 regarding communicating your findings. And do you find that like maybe disconnect, like I gave you what you asked for, now what you're asking for is something different, is where does that rear its head as a problem, you know, or maybe even more importantly, how do you know, or can you know that may be the end result? Like, for example, I'm thinking, and I'm not suggesting that it is this way, but what I have in my head is if the business unit is giving you the assignment and say that we want to know X, Y, and Z, they're going to speak in a different language, you know, so they may use words of legal consequence and you may deliver exactly what they asked you for, but that's not what they were concerned about. And vice versa. If what you're trying to do is a business market, you know, what can we learn about the marketplace and the business and strategies? And it's the lawyers asking you those questions, they're not going to be formed as properly. So is there any hallmark or moment that you need to watch out for where you might be able to early on get clued in before you went through the whole exercise? Because this takes some time and energy to do, that you might be going down the wrong path. Let's start with Rosanna.
Yes, Jean, thank you. I think that this goes again back to this getting as much information as possible upfront about what your audience is looking for. However, I also think that oftentimes this work is iterative. You know, if I'm in a new space and I'm trying to understand it, like maybe I start with a broad technical landscape, and then after I present those findings, we identify a subset of that we want to look more closely at. So then there's going to be additional work. A lot of times, these projects, you go into them with that knowledge that you're not going to be able to solve all that problem with one analysis, but you need to use that to limit your field of view so that you can focus on the right factors. But I also think it's important to be transparent with your audience about what the data can and cannot answer, because oftentimes people will ask me for information and I'm not always certain that I'm going to be able to answer their questions until I get in there and I look and see what's out there. So I think just being transparent about, hey, this is where I looked, I'm not able to find this, or I don't have a clear answer, but this is what I can tell you based on what the data shows. It's okay to do that and be transparent about those things.
Yeah. So, Gwilym, do you have any thoughts on that? Like making sure that you're not doing the ships passing in the night with the initial data, find, set, research?
Yeah, I think it's about drilling down again, but maybe in a slightly different way. And if I can coin a phrase, I'd sort of describe it as commensurate detail. So to give you an example of that would be you want to basically get a feel for whether you're about to go into a major battle, starting a new technology that you want to develop. And phase one might be to find out who the competitors are who have intelligence, who have IP in that area. I've recently done an exercise for a client where we found 147. If you were to present me with a detailed map of every bit of IP that every one of those 147 have, it would blow my mind. I think we'd just go and do something else. So I think commensurate detail there is to say, right, here are the competitors, here's the names, here's how many patents they've got, for example. And then before you go any further, you go back to the business, you go, okay, which one of these, who's going to sue you? I mean, you keep it very simple. Who's going to sue you, and who, if they find out about you, is going to give you a license because you're not a problem to them? And then you're down to 10, and then you go to the next level. You go back to Tom, you go back to Rosanna, you get the next layer of data, and then you get a lot more data about those 10. So that kind of commensurate detail at every stage is the way of, I think, as you say, Jean, making sure that you don't fly past it and ignore it completely.
And also make sure you're not getting overwhelmed, right? Because you can really miss the forest for the trees if you're not careful. So let's talk about, because we have a question from Sarah about, again, communicating, and she says that explaining IP to IP experts is much easier than explaining it to, other folks without an IP background. So do either of you have any pointers or suggestions on how to reach the broader non-IP audience? Are there any key words or phrases or that you've discovered that do have meaning to that non-IP audience, maybe the business people, for example?
Yeah, I got a good one, which is beg. I beg you to listen for 5 minutes to some of the most boring stuff you're ever going to hear, but I'll only use 5 minutes to get you the key points out there and to explode a couple of terrifying myths that prevail quite a lot outside the kind of our arcane world. Get that time. Don't take long. It doesn't take too long, but just say, please humor me for literally 5-10 minutes. I'll get the absolute basics across so that we are talking the same language. Then the keywords are going to be around risk, they're going to be around capture. I tend to avoid the word landscape because I think it's too broad, too early, and different people immediately attach different meanings to it. It's not brilliantly defined. And frankly, a couple of keywords like just patent pending and some really simple stuff, just to get a feel for how it all fits together. It is a complex, it takes years to qualify in this, but the basics are really logical and strong. And if you can get that foundation of understanding across to the non-specialists, then everything you say afterwards, you've got the lexicology in place that they understand what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Rosanna, any thoughts there?
I think really just knowing the language of your audience. Definitely the deliverables that I produce for senior executives are very different than the deliverables I produce for an R&D audience. So, a lot of times when I have to do an executive summary, I'm focused on, okay, what is important to this audience and what do they need to know as distilled by this data? And then I will provide them the full deliverable, but then I will just provide them with an executive summary. So then that says at a high level, this is what the data shows. This is why you should care. This is what, any recommendations that I might have based on what this information shows us.
Yeah. So we did a webinar. This is a long time ago. And I had a friend of mine was speaking, Ray Millian, he was at the time chief IP counsel. Now he's a general counsel of a company. And he said, and I'm pretty sure it was Ray who said this, that when you get the opportunity to talk to the C-suite or the business people within the company or the CFO, and it's usually a lot of times that'll be at a pre-planned meeting where everybody's got a certain amount of time, and it can be as little as 5 minutes. He said no more than 3 slides, and you can't anticipate you're going to get to any more than one. So the first slide is the big picture overview. Then this next slide is where we are right now vis-a-vis the competition. And then the next slide was something like where we're heading and where we think we need to be in the future, given what we know about where the competitors are and where they're going moving forward. And then there was another person on that panel that said, if you get 3 slides, that's great. He agreed with Ray. You got to be ready to only have the one, so it's got to kind of tell the story, and it's got to be, what is it that the business people are really interested in? And for them, it's about numbers. It's about competition. And the other word that I hear repeatedly over and over again is about risk. Because the general counsel is always concerned about managing legal risk. The CFO is always concerned about managing financial risk. So if you can work the word risk into your vocabulary, and with those 2 different things in mind, I think it's a lot easier for the C-suite to absorb what you're trying to say. And Sarah says she does remember that presentation by Ray, and Ray definitely emphasized that less is more, which is sort of the theme of what we talked about here. Gilliam, you already said that with data, there can be so much that sometimes you run the real risk of overwhelming the receiver.
Yeah, I think your point on risk, I totally agree. I know it was on an earlier slide, and once you've given those basics of IP, you basically are translating vast amounts of it to risk in terms of the meaning to the board. Once you start talking about it in that way, not only does it start to resonate with more broad business principles, but also it becomes something that can be evaluated. Because businesses know how to evaluate risk, whereas they're not going to be particularly happy about evaluating an infringement of a patent claim. So that transfer of language is really important, and that mapping. The other important word, so I should have mentioned actually, is opportunity. I think perhaps between those two captions kind of cover off the main things people want to know about. Where can I walk into trouble, and how can I make some money from this? How can I get the value from this?
Yeah, that's good. I like that a lot, because the other one person who have had, and again, it's been so long ago, I need to resurrect some of these, was Raymond Hegarty, who he was chief IP counsel at a number of technology companies over the years, and he always would stress speaking in the language of the CFO. So if you can use this in terms of financial terms and even accounting terms, that they're going to understand, it's going to be more familiar and more approachable. And you stop and think about it, when you are in-house, or whether you're outside and now you're trying to communicate into the audience, whoever you're trying to communicate into, you're in the position of trying to persuade them. They've got so many things on their plate, so many decisions they need to make. You need to persuade them why this one matters. So don't forget all your tools of persuasion. So use the language that will break through whatever barriers they have up, because everybody's got problems on their plates every day. So you need to, and then the other thing is, don't overblow it. Like if it's not critical, don't say it's critical. You just lose credibility too fast. All right, good. That was a good conversation. So not to say that we won't come back to that chapter, but we do have a couple other things that we wanted to tee up for you as well. Tom, we got a couple more slides that you want to kind of maybe slightly shift the conversation by a degree or two. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, sure. So I think, the last kind of 20 minutes or so, we've been very much talking about the why, why benchmark, what is it, what is the purpose? And I think this slide and the one that followed is more around like, how do we go about doing that? Like, how should an organization approach their benchmarking efforts? And when we did a survey, it became quite clear, and I think, Rosanna, you said something similar earlier, that technology grouping is by far one of the most important sort of granularity levels to start your benchmarking process at. And then again, if we head over to the next slide here, I think the industry that I work in, we've seen over the last kind of 3 or 4 years a shift in how people get to this information. So traditionally, you would access your technology groupings through really complicated and well-constructed Boolean searches, utilizing CPC codes, keywords. And although these are, they're robust, they're kind of hard to update, they can be complicated to create. And I think with the increasing volume of data that's being kind of pumped out into the world nowadays, it's important to kind of bring some more up-to-date techniques into actually gathering your information in which you're going to go and kind of conduct your benchmarking. And that's why we're seeing a lot more interest in classification using AI and machine learning to get your results. And I think one of the things that I am particularly keen on doing is using classification to start from a technology-first approach. You don't necessarily know who your competitors are, not all of them. You won't know the new entrants. You may not know the disruptors that are coming into the industry, potentially the MPs that have acquired patents in your space. And using classification, which is becoming increasingly accessible, easy to create, easy to update, and providing you with repeatable and precise results. You can start with your technology, you can run your reports, view your landscapes, and then understand really clearly who is it that is in this space, what are they doing, and fundamentally you can update that and you can report on that regularly using these new emerging techniques. And so I'm not talking here about generative AI, that's kind of the newer, more hot topic type of AI that is very much in development right now, but the more traditional, mature technologies that have been around for over a decade now, kind of machine learning classification to break down a big data problem. And I know, Gwilym, you have consumed data from LexisNexis that is broken down by classification. It'd be great to hear about your experience with that as a user.
Yeah, Gwilym, if you could lead off the commentary, that'd be great.
Thank you. And again, I think what we're always looking for is that focused condensation or distillation of the relevant data. So, for example, we've used it. Going back to an earlier slide, don't go back to this slide. I've got a copy of it here. But the point about competitor intelligence and benchmarking, getting a feel really for what technologies are starting to appear in our sphere. Newly published patent applications are a really good indication of, well, one of two things: either where a business is going or where they want you to think it's going. But I tend not to be too paranoid about that, and I tend to assume that mostly people file patent applications of areas of potential interest. So doing that again is important, but you've got to break it down, because that still could be hundreds and hundreds a month or something, which is very difficult to manage. So again, using intelligent tools to find out the ones that are bang on the areas you're looking for is really important. And it gives you a couple of insights. First of all, is the marketplace, is the technology area going in a direction you maybe hadn't contemplated, that you're going to be able to track that? And secondly, what we sometimes call new kids on the block. Who else is there? Hey, there's a new player here. We've not been watching it. This is the first time we've seen this play, because let's face it, a patent application may well publish before a product gets to market. So it may be a very good early warning system. But again, having focus on, that's a good example of why we would be doing it. We want you to find this information because we want to know whether the market's going in a weird direction, and we want to know who's appearing on the market that we didn't know about before. That means that with that put together, you're going to start getting some really useful intel.
You really can. And, we did a webinar some time ago, again, with Patent Site. It was a LexisNexis webinar, and they had a chart showing about Apple iWatches. If you had been in the watch industry and you were doing the type of searching that Gilliam, you were just in monitoring and stuff, that you would have seen about 7 or 8 years before Apple introduced their first iWatch, that they had started applying for patents in this space. And they were kind of funny at first, it seemed, like the Dick Tracy watch, it can do everything for you. And it probably caught people by, oh, well, maybe they didn't think this was serious. Maybe they thought this was just, oh, we're just going to patent this, see what happens, or get a patent on behalf of some, important engineer who has been here a long time or whatever. But then year after year after year, that part of their portfolio kept growing. And at that point, alarm bells could have and probably should have gone off by all of the watch companies to realize that, if Apple's going to get into this game, then that's going to take a portion of our market away, because it'll communicate with all these other Apple products. And, I would think in the high-end watch world, the Apple customer base would be pretty coveted, I would think. You're not buying Apple products if you don't have some disposable income, right?
Indeed. And I think could be very important if you are lucky enough as a patent attorney to be working on a platform technology. So somewhere where your client has basically created a new area of business almost. That is incredibly powerful, and obviously your own IP is the opportunity there. But one of the risks is very much that somebody comes up with an orthogonal way of doing it that you just hadn't seen coming. And I won't name names, but I worked for a big telecoms company in the 2000s and early 2010s. By the middle of that decade, they had kind of disappeared because Apple actually came along and did something different. So keeping an eye on that can be really, really important.
Yeah. So Rosanna, now from the research standpoint, you never know what you're going to find, or if you're going to find anything, right? So how do you? I almost don't know how to ask it. I guess the question is, how do you create a robust enough program of monitoring and researching and looking at the market to make sure that you are capturing that kind of information? Because that was a really stark example. Now, not all of the examples are going to be that quite so stark, and then they might require you reading some of the tea leaves. but if you're not looking, you're not going to find it. So how do you, I guess my question is this, how do you look with enough confidence that you think you might be able to discover that and in a timely enough fashion for it to be competitively relevant?
So I think there's a few ways. So one is just some channel diversity. And by channel, I mean like you're getting your data from a multitude of sources. So, you know, if you're monitoring news and industry sources, you're also monitoring product launch activity if relevant to your industry. You're also monitoring IP activity. And you're looking at that in a broader picture to see, hey, you know, what is this showing me? Or where are these sort of subtle hints that something is coming down the pipeline? Like there's always clues or indicators. Sometimes that means like digging through an investor transcript and reading between the lines and seeing what people have to say about what they're working on. So all of those components go into understanding who your competitors are. So this is not like a once and done thing. You don't just take a look and then, you know, move on. Like you need to create a cadence for reviewing this information and for making sure that you are being notified of things as they are happening, and also that you just have general awareness of what's happening in all these different spaces. I think sometimes people are a little bit, they're focused on one specific area, but they're not looking at the broader picture. So if you can tie in technology along with the market piece, I think you will see a much more complete picture of what that competitor is doing.
So let me ask you this, Rosanna. Are there any kinds of pockets of data that you like to look at that maybe you think are not enough people are really taking this seriously or considering it? And I'll give you like for instance, and not always, obviously, right? But the SEC filings have to be honest, and sometimes they are brutally honest. You know, and particularly like when you're talking about, you know, litigation risk, you know, and how many litigations are going on and how many litigations they're going to anticipate and what the risk is, and they'll say things like, oh, could be catastrophically bad, like we might have to go bankrupt if we wind up losing this litigation. You know, and maybe they don't say it quite like that, but you know, that's the subtext. And then obviously you need to know from probably a business lawyer, like, what does this really mean? What does this language mean? What are they trying to say? Sometimes the risk is so significant that it's clear for everybody to see, you know, like if mega giant company, if it's a Polaroid versus Kodak kind of case, you know, one of them is going to wind up not having any of the market, you know, so that risk is clear. But are there any other kinds of pockets of places or rocks that you think people should look under more often?
I mean, for consumer goods, definitely if you're not paying attention to social channels, you should watch those because you never really know what's going to turn up on there, especially images of products that might be in test markets. You can often see those on social channels before you're aware that they're even out or before things like syndicated data sources pick up on them. That's a valuable source of information. And also not just the SEC filings, but like the investor transcripts. I love those because the banks are not afraid to ask the tough questions. And so you get some really good dialogue in there. So I enjoy reading those. I don't know what that says about me as a person, but
well, I
I
think what it says is what you really want is you want to know the real scoop, right? So
right.
and the banks, they and other investors in hedge funds and, you know, pension plans that are investing large amounts of money, for them, there's no personal relationship. I mean, it's all they're going to ask the question that the person being asked least wants to answer. You know, and that's where you get real insight, I think. Gilliam, any thoughts on that there? Is there a particular in your years of consuming data, is there a place where you're like, you know, maybe it's not always got something interesting, but I always want my researchers to make sure they did X?
Well, certainly when I talk to the client about getting that data in, then I will also say to the client at the same time, but I want to crowdsource this. In particular, please come talk to your sales guys and your distributors, because talking about rocks to look under, they're the ones who are out in the market saying, oh, there's this, every time I'm coming up against the same people in the pitch or whatever it might be, or people keep buying their thing, not our thing. That gives you a really good insight. You also can pick up very early on more nefarious activities, like some kind of weird activities in certain territories. So that's kind of a rock to look under more broadly. In terms of the data rocks, I do actually go back to my kind of experts on that and say, look, this is what we're trying to achieve. Where else should we be looking? Because I don't always know all of the relevant sources. Social is an interesting one, actually. I don't think I work with clients in quite that area, but I think in future I'll take that one into consideration as well.
Yeah, and then also, just to put a pin in it with respect to the going back and crowdsourcing this. Those are the people that are out there on the pavement trying to sell for you, and they're also the ones that are going to the trade shows. So they're your on the ground kind of reconnaissance. They're going to see a lot of this stuff before you're ever going to be able to find it, because they keep it close to the vest. A lot of times people do that prior to unveiling it at a particular trade show. And it may seem like it comes out of nowhere, but those people are going to see a lot of that stuff first.
Completely, yeah.
All right. So in the last part of our panel here, what we have want to discuss is benchmarking, the questions that matter to people when they're going through this, among other things. Tom, what are we looking at here?
Yeah, sure. So, as you've covered why, covered how, kind of the what now is important to understand. And I think there's no one answer, right, for all clients, for all use cases. It depends entirely on what you're looking to understand and achieve. That will dictate what metrics, what data is most important. But we generally find that when you're looking to benchmark a portfolio at the technology level, there's a few key things that are emerging as key metrics to understand. Size of portfolio, kind of volume of patents, always going to be an important consideration. The geography, the different filing strategies of different organizations across different jurisdictions, always good to know. And then things like age and activity of actual patent filings, get an understanding for what the market is doing and how they're going about doing that. The one I've kind of skipped over here briefly on this slide is quality. And Gina, if we could go across to the next slide. One thing we are seeing more of is people coming to us and asking questions around alternative ways to benchmark their portfolio, and quality as a metric is becoming, as far as I can see, a lot more prevalent these days. And we use at LexisNexis the Patent Asset Index. It's a scientifically robust methodology for understanding a portfolio strength. It's been around for the last 8 years or so, and we're now starting to see that organizations are using it as a supplement or even as a replacement for quantity-based analysis. And you can see on the screen here, there's a screen grab from the Interdigital 2023 full year report, where they've actually gone and said, we know we don't have the largest portfolio in the 5G space. It's, we're not here aiming for pure volume of filings to kind of get our competitive edge out there, but the quality of our assets, what we actually own, and kind of how high quality they are, that is something that they're looking at more and more and benchmarking off of that basis. So again, maybe Gina, over to you on this, but it would be great to maybe have a conversation around what metrics you all are most interested in when it comes to benchmarking. And in particular, I'd be interested to know quality is something that is becoming increasingly important these days in benchmarking efforts.
Yeah, sure. Rosanna, you want to take the first stab at Tom's question about quality and how important quality is, and what other what out of this list here for benchmarking you think is most important? Any observations?
Sure. I mean, from a quality standpoint, I would say we are mainly focused on, overall strength of, particular patents and portfolios, like which ones are most valuable to a particular company and which ones are the most valuable to us. In terms of other benchmarks, since I work on the R&D strategy side, I'm mainly looking at it to understand the broader competitive picture. What changes or shifts are we noticing in competitive activity? Have they changed where they're filing? Have they changed where they're filing in terms of technology space? Are there areas that are missing? Are there new inventors that are emerging? These are the types of trends that we are looking at to understand from an R&D standpoint what this says about their broader R&D strategy.
Yeah. William, thoughts on these metrics here?
I think they're all interesting ones. Gene, you and I were both laughing about the last one, that tiny one, length of claims.
Yep.
It's actually really relevant in the day job. A long claim tends to be a lot more difficult to infringe. All of these are really useful. Another one that I would be looking at, again, depending on the question the business needed answering, would be litigiousness, some measure of actual litigation activity. Because if I'm up against somebody who just sues all the time, I need to know that.
Right.
Because that changes the risk profile quite significantly, which goes to one of the questions in the comments actually about, yes, maybe patents, at least in the US, are being a little more easily invalidated, but anyone who's been in litigation will know that the end result becomes almost irrelevant versus the complete disruption while you're in there. So that kind of stat is also really important. One that's come up a lot with several of my clients when they're trying to work out budgeting is patents per R&D spend. That one is a key one for actually just working out what they should be doing. It's with all of these, you might decide that we've decided we're going to spend more on patents than anyone else, or we've decided that we're going to take a cut there. So you don't have to follow the trend, but understanding it is a really good stage in making your own decisions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I thought the length of claims here on the chart on the right was, if that's going to be a choice on the question, that's got to be higher than that. And if it's not, probably we would think that the respondents were more on the business side, and maybe their counsel haven't explained to them just how critically important that is. So that might be an opportunity to educate the C-suite and the business people about what is it that we are doing that matters. If your competitor's got 10,000 patents in one area, it says, oh, okay, well that's some information. But if their broadest patent claim is a column long, well, then the whole family, the whole portfolio is not particularly scary, perhaps. And so that's obviously of critical importance and conveys a lot of information. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about how you absolutely need to make sure you're communicating this information to the people who have decision-making authority in a way that they can consume it. And to go back to the question, William, that you mentioned that came in the chat about it being much easier to invalidate patents in the US, and has that changed the conversation with the business people? I think it certainly has. I'm not sure it has in the way that I would think is appropriate, though. I'm starting to hear more and more people that are concerned about, and this comes up when I'm thinking about length of claims. It's not always terrible to have a long, detailed claim. It's terrible if that's all you have. And what I'm hearing increasingly is this understanding by patent attorneys who have worked their way up into the chief IP counsel and even general counsel. They get that if I'm selling a product and I'm making money here, I need to have a portion of my portfolio claim exactly what we're making money on, right? And this maybe is not right for everybody because it won't apply to the software folks. But if you can touch what it is that your company is selling and making money on, that means it is susceptible to being knocked off. And so you want to think about, how do I deal with all these knockoffs? Well, don't forget design patents. Okay, yeah, they're very weak, except for they're the exact right tool when you need it. And if you don't have it, you want to have a claim that literally covers everything you're selling that you're making money on. You want to really make sure you insulate your product. And then the byproduct, and why this comes up in the conversations realm, is those are the claims that aren't going down. Those are not getting invalidated. It's the big, broad claims that capture not only what you're doing, but anything, what anybody else might think of doing. And that's where you go into the abstractness. Now, we can talk about whether I agree with where we're at. I don't, but we're there. So you need to, I think, strategically think, what does this mean, and how do I then have to insulate ourselves? Um, any thoughts
Totally. Yeah.
on that, either Rosanna or Gwillingham?
I'm happy to just jump in quickly.
Sure.
Absolutely right. And of course, there are some key strategies out there for mitigating that by using divisionals or continuations. That's a different webinar. But you're right. You need to keep a good eye on that. Actually, if I might just quickly pick up two of those metrics there, because the age and pipeline metrics, that's the kind of thing where you can do some really interesting drilling down. Because if you look into a competitor and you identify that there's a lump of patents that are getting towards the last 5-10 years of life and there's nothing in the pipeline, those guys aren't innovating. That's interesting. What do they do? How can you start building around what they're doing? So you can start being quite creative with the data, again, if you've asked the right question in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've seen that, Rosanna, I don't know whether it's a little bit outside the focus of Hershey, but you see that in the pharmaceutical area, right? The pharmaceutical analysts are always keenly aware of pipeline. And a few years ago, there was thought about, well, Pfizer's pipeline is not maybe as strong as others. So then in the pharmaceutical area, what do? Well, you go out and you buy a couple of startup biotech companies, a few startup pharmaceutical companies, in order to create some robustness again for your product line. Um, how important is that for you guys, or generally speaking, do you think? From a like a data perspective, when you're trying to monitor what's going on in the industry and marketplace?
So I think a lot of this goes back to those secondary sources. So when you're reading and you're understanding what senior leaders at other companies are identifying as where they see as opportunity areas, or they see as shifts in the consumer landscape or shifts in the market landscape, those are sometimes indicators for areas where you might expect to see changes in the technology. For example, if someone says, I have these robust sustainability goals for recycling, and I'm going to work on, some new special polymer that is going to be recyclable everywhere. Okay, so then that's one of their key objectives that you would expect to see filings associated with those stated objectives.
Okay.
And so
Awesome.
I would adjust my queries to mirror that. So, and for me, this gets back to this whole, you need to have a cadence for reviewing and updating this information. You need to reflect, acquisitions and divestitures from core competitors. You also need to reflect business shifts from those competitors, like new areas where they may be entering, as well as areas that are no longer operating in.
Good, great. I think we could just continue talking. We're at the top of the hour, and I want to give everybody the opportunity to wrap up and with your final thoughts, and to thank LexisNexis for letting us have this conversation today. We have a couple, while you guys are thinking of your final thoughts, your takeaway message, what I'll let folks know, we have a couple questions about specifically LexisNexis products and how you would do this using LexisNexis products. We'll make sure that the folks at LexisNexis get those, and we'll respond to you directly and get you any information that you need. But thank you all for being here. And I've stalled enough to give you some time to think about what it is that your takeaway message is going to be. And Tom, I'd like you to participate. I'll give you the last word, Tom, here today. So Rosanna, let's start with you. What is the one thing that you hope people leave today remembering?
I think just going back to this whole proactive approach. As soon as you can narrow down your focus and what's important to you and what you need to keep tabs on, then you can create your process for monitoring or updating that information. And once you have that process, commit to a cadence for going back in there and reviewing the information and updating it. There are a variety of ways to track this. One way might be a matrix. where you have, you know, these players and these are the key attributes you want to monitor, and you're going to update that on, say, X number of months. You know, that's one example of one way you can do it. Another is by using one of these various tools that allow you to pipe data from a variety of sources into one place, like more like a dashboard, so you can see it all in one spot. That can sometimes be helpful if you have a lot of noise and you're trying to gather all of that into something that you can use and execute on quickly.
Great. Thanks a lot, Rosanna. William.
For me, it's about that why question again. I think it's making sure that your question is something along the lines of, what do I need? What data do I need to mitigate IP risk and maximize IP value?
Great. Thank you so much. And Tom, your final thought here today.
I think I'm going to sort of almost echo Gwilym there in the sense of it's good to see how starting with why and generally having that awareness of your audience is super important. I think for me, it was really interesting to see, you know, we'd surveyed hundreds of IP professionals and got a set of results which, you know, realistically didn't match to the worldview that this call had, and it was almost like an inverse relationship to the results that we got back versus the important metrics for you guys. And yeah, really interesting for me as a data provider to, you know, ensure we're always starting with why, asking why again, and asking why one more time, so we can get to the bottom of people's needs before we can then provide the right solutions.
Yeah. Great. I thought this was a fascinating conversation. I appreciate you all being here, panel, and I appreciate you and the audience spending today with us to have this conversation. Look forward to seeing you again in the future. Again, we'll get everybody answers to the questions, the specific questions that you asked. But that's all we have for today. So we'll see you all soon. Bye for now.